"I speak 9 languages," said the cleaner's son. The Arab millionaire laughed, until the unthinkable happened. They laughed at him like he was nothing, but he silenced the room with brilliance and evidence, and by the end, the boy no one respected rewrote the rules of power. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. I promise that this will be the best story you will hear in your life. The morning sun peeked through the faded curtains of the small apartment in downtown Philadelphia as 14-year-old Elijah Mason organized his notebooks on the kitchen table. His mother, Sophia, moved quietly around the cramped kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast before heading to her job as a cleaning staff supervisor at Meridian Enterprises, one of the city's most prestigious corporations. "Did you sleep well?" Sophia asked, placing a plate of toast in front of her son. Elijah nodded, his eyes focused on the Russian grammar book in his hands. "I finally got those verb conjugations memorized," he said with quiet satisfaction. Sophia smiled, the pride evident in her eyes despite the exhaustion that seemed permanently etched onto her face. At 35, she looked a decade older, worn down by years of single parenthood and grueling work schedules. "That's wonderful, mijo," she said, unconsciously slipping into Spanish, her native language. "I think I'm ready for the certification test next month," Elijah continued, switching effortlessly to Spanish. He then grabbed another book from his stack. "But I should really focus more on Mandarin. The tonal distinctions still trip me up sometimes." Sophia shook her head in amazement. Since he was a small child, Elijah had displayed an extraordinary gift for languages. What had started as a way to connect with his mother's heritage had blossomed into an insatiable passion. By 14, he had achieved near-native fluency in Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, German, Arabic, Russian, and was making remarkable progress with Mandarin and Japanese. While other kids his age focused on video games and social media, Elijah immersed himself in linguistics textbooks, foreign films, and online conversation groups. "You know," Sophia said, sitting down for a moment before she had to leave, "there's a career fair at Meridian today. Some high school students are coming to learn about corporate opportunities. Maybe you could stop by after school. It might be good for you to see what's out there." Elijah hesitated. His relationship with Meridian was complicated. While his mother had worked there for nearly a decade, moving up from night cleaner to supervisor of the entire janitorial staff, he had heard enough stories about the cutthroat corporate culture to make him wary. Still, he couldn't deny his curiosity. "Maybe," he said non-committally. "I have language club after school, but I could come by afterward." Sophia kissed the top of his head as she gathered her things. "No pressure. Just thought you might find it interesting. Who knows? Maybe you'll be running one of these companies someday." After his mother left, Elijah continued studying until it was time for school. The day passed in a blur of classes that rarely challenged him, though he maintained perfect grades out of respect for his teachers and his mother's sacrifices. By late afternoon, as language club wrapped up, he found himself thinking about the career fair at Meridian. Perhaps it wouldn't hurt to take a look. When Elijah arrived at the towering glass headquarters of Meridian Enterprises, he texted his mother to let her know he was there. The lobby bustled with activity as high school students, mostly from the prestigious private academies in the area, milled about in their crisp uniforms, collecting brochures and chatting with representatives. Elijah, in his public school clothes, jeans and a simple button-down shirt, felt immediately out of place. Still, he held his head high as he made his way through the crowd. He spotted his mother across the lobby, directing her cleaning staff as they maintained the immaculate space despite the increased foot traffic. She caught his eye and gave him a small wave, then gestured toward the main exhibition hall where the presentations were taking place. Elijah nodded and headed in that direction. Inside, various departments had set up booths showcasing their work. Elijah was immediately drawn to the International Relations Division, where diagrams of global markets and foreign partnerships lined the walls. As he examined a chart of Meridian's overseas ventures, he overheard a conversation nearby. "The expansion into the Middle Eastern market has been slower than projected," a young executive was explaining to a group of interested students. "Language barriers and cultural misunderstandings have cost us several potentially lucrative contracts. Elijah listened intently, noting the specific examples the man gave of mistranslations and diplomatic faux pas that had damaged negotiations. Without thinking, he spoke up. "Excuse me, but that's not actually correct." The group turned to look at him, expressions ranging from surprise to amusement. "The phrase you just quoted in Arabic doesn't mean what you think it does," Elijah continued, undeterred. "It's actually a formal greeting that varies by region. Using it the way your team did would have been considered overly familiar in a business context, especially in Gulf states." The young executive, Brandon Wells, stared at Elijah with narrowed eyes. "And you are?" "Elijah Mason," he replied, straightening his shoulders. "My mother works here." Recognition flickered across Brandon's face. "Ah, the cleaning lady's son. And you're an expert in Arabic business etiquette?" Several of the students snickered, and Elijah felt heat rise to his cheeks. But years of being underestimated had taught him to stand his ground. "I speak Arabic," he said simply. "Along with 8 other languages." This elicited more laughter, louder now, and even Brandon couldn't suppress a smirk. 9 languages? At what, 14? 15? 14, Elijah confirmed, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The commotion had attracted attention, and a small crowd began to gather. Among them was Alexander Harrington, Meridian's billionaire founder and CEO, who had stopped by the career fair for a photo opportunity with the company's future leaders. "What's happening here?" Harrington asked, his commanding presence immediately silencing the laughter. Brandon gestured dismissively toward Elijah. "Just the janitor's kid claiming he speaks 9 languages and knows more about our Middle Eastern business than our international team." Harrington turned his cold gaze to Elijah, looking him up and down with undisguised skepticism. 9 languages?" he repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. "That's quite a claim for someone so young." Something in Harrington's dismissive tone ignited a fire in Elijah's chest. All the years of studying in secret, of helping his mother translate documents at her various cleaning jobs, of being overlooked and underestimated because of where he came from, it all culminated in this moment of quiet defiance. "It's not a claim, sir," Elijah replied in flawless formal Arabic. "It's a fact." Harrington's eyebrows shot up, but his expression quickly morphed into amusement. "A party trick," he said to the onlookers, many of whom were now recording the exchange on their phones. "Anyone can memorize a few phrases." Elijah switched to Mandarin, his pronunciation precise as he discussed the nuances of international business protocol. Then to Russian, French, German, and finally back to English, each transition smooth and natural. The crowd had fallen silent, but Harrington wasn't ready to concede. "Impressive memorization, young man, but understanding business negotiations requires more than just vocabulary. It requires education, experience, cultural immersion, advantages I suspect you haven't had." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, and Elijah saw several executives nodding in agreement. In the back of the room, he spotted his mother, who had slipped in during the commotion. Her face reflected both fear and fierce pride. Drawing strength from her presence, Elijah made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "If you'll allow me, Mr. Harrington," he said clearly, "I'd like to prove that I'm more than just a janitor's kid with a good memory." Harrington chuckled, glancing around at his executives and the enraptured students. "And how do you propose to do that?" "Give me access to the reports from your failed negotiations in the Middle East," Elijah said, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. "Let me show you where the real misunderstandings occurred and how they could have been prevented." The CEO's amusement faltered slightly, replaced by a flash of something harder to read. Challenge, concern. For a moment, the room held its breath, waiting for his response. "That would be quite impossible," Harrington finally said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Those documents are confidential. Besides, I have a company to run. I can't waste time indulging every precocious teenager who walks through our doors." The dismissal was clear, and a wave of uncomfortable laughter rippled through the crowd. But Elijah wasn't finished. "Then perhaps we could try something simpler," he suggested, switching to perfect classical Arabic once more. "Your company recently lost a $50 million contract with Al-Farsi Investments in Dubai. The official reason was irreconcilable differences in approach. But the real issue was a mistranslation in the third round of negotiations that your team never identified. A hush fell over the room. Harrington's smile vanished completely. The silence in the room was deafening. Alexander Harrington's face had transformed from mocking amusement to stone-cold seriousness in an instant. The executives behind him exchanged nervous glances. "How could you possibly know that?" Harrington demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Elijah maintained his composure, though his heart hammered against his ribs. The Al-Farsi negotiations were covered in the business section of several international papers. "I follow global business news in multiple languages. Your team used an idiom that, when literally translated, seemed innocuous, but carried deeply offensive connotations in Gulf Arabic. It implied distrust, which is why Sheikh Al-Farsi walked away." Brandon Wells stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. We had professional translators who were likely familiar with modern standard Arabic, not the specific regional dialect," Elijah interrupted. "It's a common mistake." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Several executives were frantically checking their phones, presumably verifying Elijah's claims. Harrington's jaw tightened as one of them leaned over to whisper something in his ear. "This is hardly the venue for such a discussion," Harrington said coldly. "If you're so interested in our business practices, perhaps you should apply for an internship when you're older." He turned to leave, clearly attempting to end the uncomfortable confrontation. "I've also analyzed the press releases for your recent acquisition attempt of Tech Vision Solutions," Elijah continued, undeterred. "The German translation on your website contains 3 critical errors that completely change the meaning of your proposed terms. Given that Tech Vision's parent company is based in Munich, I'm surprised no one caught it." Harrington stopped in his tracks. When he turned back, his expression had shifted from dismissal to calculated assessment. "You seem very interested in Meridian's business, Mr. Mason, almost suspiciously so." "My mother has worked here for 9 years, Elijah replied simply. "I hear things, I read, I pay attention." Sophia had made her way through the crowd and now stood at the edge of the circle that had formed around her son and the CEO. Her face was a mask of controlled worry. "Sophia." Harrington acknowledged with a nod, suddenly connecting the dots. "Your son is quite remarkable." "Yes, sir, he is," she replied, her accent more pronounced under stress, but her gaze steady. Harrington seemed to come to a decision. "My office." 10 minutes, he turned to his assistant. "Call Dr. Nakamura from the linguistics department at Penn. See if she's available for a video conference immediately." Then, addressing the startled crowd, "The career fair continues. Thank you all for your interest in Meridian Enterprises." With that, he strode away, leaving a buzz of excited conversation in his wake. Brandon Wells shot Elijah a venomous look before following his boss. Sophia rushed to her son's side. "Elijah, what have you done?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Mr. Harrington is not someone you challenge publicly." "I'm sorry, Mom," Elijah said, the adrenaline beginning to fade. "But I couldn't just stand there while they laughed and dismissed me. Dismissed us." Sophia touched his cheek gently. "I know, mijo. I know." She straightened his collar, a gesture so familiar it instantly calmed him. "Whatever happens next, I'm proud of you. But be careful with your words. Men like Harrington don't like to be proven wrong, especially by someone they consider beneath them." Exactly 9 minutes later, Elijah and Sophia were escorted into Alexander Harrington's expansive corner office on the top floor. The view of Philadelphia spread out before them, a testament to the power concentrated in this single room. Harrington sat behind an imposing desk, flanked by Brandon Wells and 2 other executives Elijah didn't recognize. On a large screen mounted on the wall, a Japanese woman in her 50s waited patiently. "Dr. Nakamura, thank you for joining us on such short notice," Harrington said, gesturing for Elijah and Sophia to sit in the chairs arranged before his desk. "We have a rather unusual situation that could benefit from your expertise." "Always happy to help, Alexander," Dr. Nakamura replied, her gaze curious as it settled on Elijah. "This young man claims to speak 9 languages fluently," Harrington explained. "Given your position as head of the linguistics department and your work in language acquisition, I thought you might help us verify this extraordinary claim." Dr. Nakamura's expression remained neutral. I'd be happy to have a conversation with him. What followed was unlike anything Elijah had experienced before. For nearly an hour, Dr. Nakamura conversed with him in Japanese, Mandarin, French, German, and Russian, seamlessly switching between topics ranging from literature to science to current events. She tested not just his vocabulary and grammar, but his understanding of cultural nuances, idiomatic expressions, and regional variations. Throughout the examination, Elijah remained composed, though beads of sweat formed on his forehead under the intense scrutiny. Sophia watched from her chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as her son responded to each question, each challenge, with remarkable fluency. Finally, Dr. Nakamura turned her attention back to Harrington. In my professional opinion, she said, Elijah exhibits language proficiency that would place him in the superior to distinguished range on the ILR scale in all the languages we've tested. His command of cultural nuances and dialectal variations is particularly remarkable for someone his age and background. She paused, looking directly at Elijah. I would very much like to conduct a more formal assessment. This level of polyglottism is extremely rare, especially acquired at such a young age without immersive experience abroad. Harrington's expression remained unreadable. Thank you, Doctor. That's very helpful. After Dr. Nakamura signed off, the room fell silent. Harrington studied Elijah with new intensity, as if recalculating something in his mind. Impressive, he finally said, but proficiency in languages doesn't automatically translate to business acumen. You made some bold claims about our international negotiations. I did, Elijah acknowledged, and I stand by them. Harrington pressed a button on his desk. Janet, bring in the Al-Farsi files and the TechVision acquisition documents. Brandon Wells shifted uncomfortably. Sir, those are confidential. I'm aware of the confidentiality of my own company's documents. Brandon, Harrington cut him off coldly. When the files arrived, Harrington pushed them across the desk toward Elijah. Show me. For the next 30 minutes, Elijah pored over the documents, identifying mistranslations, cultural missteps, and strategic errors in the company's international communications. He explained each finding clearly, suggesting alternative approaches that might have yielded better results. The executives' faces grew increasingly tense as Elijah systematically exposed failures that had cost the company millions. Brandon, in particular, seemed to be struggling to maintain his composure, his face reddening with each new revelation. Enough, Harrington said finally, holding up a hand. He leaned back in his chair, regarding Elijah with a mixture of irritation and reluctant respect. Your analysis is not without merit. Elijah closed the folder, waiting. The ball was in Harrington's court now. What exactly do you want, young man? The billionaire asked bluntly. Why come here today and create this spectacle? The question caught Elijah off guard. He hadn't planned any of this. He'd simply reacted to the dismissal and disrespect. But now, facing one of the most powerful men in the business world, he realized he had an unprecedented opportunity. I want recognition, he said slowly, gathering his thoughts. Not just for me, but for people like my mother, who work just as hard as anyone else in this building, but are treated as invisible. I want opportunity, not handed to me, but not denied because of where I come from or who my parents are. Sophia reached over and squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with emotion. And more specifically, Harrington pressed, his tone businesslike. Elijah straightened in his chair. 3 things. First, I want my mother promoted to Director of Facilities Management, a position that matches the work she's already doing, but without the title or compensation. Sophia gasped softly beside him, but Elijah continued. Second, I want Meridian to establish a scholarship program for employees' children and for students from underrepresented communities, focusing on international business and languages. Harrington's expression remained impassive, but he nodded slightly for Elijah to continue. Third, Elijah said, his voice steady, I want to work here as a junior consultant in international communications, part-time after school and during summers. I can help prevent the kinds of mistakes that cost you the Al-Farsi contract. Brandon Wells let out a derisive laugh. This is extortion. He's a child with no qualifications beyond a talent for languages. demanding executive positions, and Brandon, Harrington silenced him with a single word. He studied Elijah for a long moment, his calculating gaze unnerving in its intensity. "Your requests are ambitious," he finally said. "Some might say presumptuous." "They're fair," Elijah countered, "and they would benefit Meridian as much as they would benefit us." A ghost of a smile flickered across Harrington's face. "You negotiate like someone twice your age." He turned to Sophia. "Your son is quite exceptional, Miss Mason. You must be very proud." "Every day, sir," she replied quietly. Harrington drummed his fingers on the desk, considering. "The promotion is straightforward enough. Your mother's work has been exemplary, and we've been considering restructuring facilities management for some time." Sophia blinked in surprise, clearly unaware of this. "The scholarship program is more complicated, but not without merit. We've been looking to enhance our corporate social responsibility initiatives." He paused, his gaze returning to Elijah. "As for your employment, there are child labor laws to consider, liability issues, confidentiality concerns." "I've researched the relevant regulations," Elijah replied. "With parental consent and proper limitations on hours, it's entirely legal for someone my age to work as a consultant. I would, of course, sign any necessary confidentiality agreements." Harrington actually chuckled at that. "Of course you would." He leaned forward, his expression serious once more. "Before I agree to anything, I need to understand something. There are thousands of bright, ambitious young people in this city. What makes you different? Why should I invest Meridian's resources in you specifically?" It was the fundamental question, the one that cut to the heart of everything. Elijah took a deep breath. Elijah met Harrington's gaze unflinchingly. "Because I see what others miss," he said. "I understand perspectives that most people in this building never consider. I know what it's like to be underestimated and overlooked, which means I notice the people and details that others ignore. That's valuable in any business, but especially in international relations." He gestured toward the documents on the desk. "So I found those mistakes because I approach language differently than your translators do. They see it as a technical skill. I see it as a living connection between cultures. And frankly, sir, you need that perspective if you want to expand globally." Harrington's expression remained carefully neutral, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of recognition. "Perhaps one more thing," Elijah continued, reaching into his backpack. He pulled out a slim folder and placed it on the desk. "This is my analysis of Meridian's upcoming negotiations with Takashi Industries in Japan, based on public information, and what I've observed about your company's approach. I've identified several potential pitfalls and suggested strategies to avoid them." Brandon reached for the folder, but Harrington was faster. He opened it and scanned the first page, his eyebrows rising slightly as he read. "When did you prepare this?" he asked. "Over the past few weeks," Elijah admitted. "I was considering sending it anonymously, but then today happened." Harrington closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, studying Elijah with new intensity. After what felt like an eternity, he pressed the intercom button again. "Janet, have legal draw up the paperwork for Sophia Mason's promotion to Director of Facilities Management, effective immediately, and contact PR about establishing a scholarship foundation." He paused. "Also, I need the standard confidentiality agreements and a special consultant contract, modified for a minor with parental consent." Brandon Wells stood abruptly. "Sir, this is highly irregular. The board will have questions." "The board," Harrington cut him off, "expects me to identify and secure talent that gives Meridian a competitive edge." "That's exactly what I'm doing." He turned to Elijah and Sophia. "I'll need a few days to arrange everything properly. In the meantime, Mr. Mason, I suggest you prepare for your first assignment. The Takashi negotiations begin next week, and I want you there." The magnitude of what had just happened washed over Elijah. He had walked into Meridian Enterprises as the invisible cleaning lady's son and was walking out as a consultant with the ear of the CEO. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington," he said, rising from his chair. "You won't regret this decision." Harrington's smile was thin but genuine. "See that I don't." As they left the office, Sophia pulled Elijah into a tight embrace, whispering words of pride in rapid Spanish. Over his mother's shoulder, Elijah caught Brandon Wells watching them, his expression a dangerous mixture of humiliation and rage. In that moment, Elijah realized that winning Harrington's approval was only the beginning of his challenges. He had just made a powerful enemy in a world he barely understood. The following weeks were a whirlwind of change. Sophia moved into a spacious new office with her name on the door, taking command of a department that had previously barely acknowledged her existence. Elijah divided his time between school, where his teachers had been stunned by the special arrangement with Meridian, and the company's international division, where he worked closely with translators and negotiators preparing for the Takashi deal. Not everyone welcomed the newcomers. While some employees were genuinely impressed by Elijah's abilities and Sophia's organizational skills, others viewed them with suspicion and resentment. Brandon Wells, in particular, made no secret of his disdain, questioning Elijah's input at every opportunity and undermining Sophia's authority when he thought no one important was watching. Despite the resistance, Elijah threw himself into the work with characteristic intensity. He reviewed every document related to the Takashi negotiations, identifying subtle linguistic and cultural issues that could impact the discussions. He created comprehensive briefing materials for the negotiating team, explaining Japanese business etiquette and communication styles in practical, actionable terms. The night before the first video conference with Takashi executives, Elijah worked late, double-checking translations and rehearsing key phrases with the lead negotiator. As he headed toward the elevator, he overheard voices from a conference room and recognized Brandon's distinctive tone. "It's absurd," Brandon was saying. "Harrington's treating this kid like some kind of prodigy, when he's clearly just a well-rehearsed parrot. Languages aren't that special. Plenty of people speak multiple languages." "The mother's promotion is what gets me," another voice responded. "From cleaning toilets to director in one day? Tell me that's not fishy." "They won't last," Brandon assured his companion. "The kid will mess up eventually, they always do. And when he does, I'll be there to make sure everyone sees it." Elijah slipped away silently, his stomach knotting with anxiety. He had expected resistance, but the active hostility in Brandon's voice was chilling. Still, he reminded himself, this was exactly why his presence at Meridian was necessary. People like Brandon would never change unless forced to confront their prejudices. The Takashi negotiations began smoothly. Elijah remained in the background, observing the interactions and passing notes to the lead negotiator when he noticed potential misunderstandings. By the end of the first session, even skeptical team members were acknowledging the value of his insights. Harrington, who had observed part of the proceedings, pulled Elijah aside afterward. "Your preparation made a difference," he said, his tone businesslike but approving. "Takashi's team seemed impressed by our cultural awareness." "Thank you, sir," Elijah replied. "But we should be careful about tomorrow's discussion of production timelines." Japanese executives rarely say no directly. They tend to express refusal through hesitation or changing the subject. "So if we push too hard for commitments, we risk creating tension." Harrington nodded thoughtfully. "I'll make sure the team understands that." "Good work, Mason." As Elijah's contributions became more visible, so did the attempts to discredit him. Documents he had reviewed would mysteriously revert to earlier versions. Invitations to important meetings would fail to reach him. Comments he made in discussions would be attributed to others in official summaries. Sophia faced similar challenges. Maintenance requests for executives' offices would be expedited without her approval, while critical repairs in public areas were delayed. Budget allocations she had carefully calculated would be questioned and revised without consultation. Through it all, mother and son supported each other, developing strategies to document their work and build alliances with colleagues who valued results over office politics. Slowly, they began to establish themselves within Meridian's complex ecosystem. The real turning point came during the final round of the Takashi negotiations. After weeks of careful discussions, the deal was nearly complete, when a last-minute issue threatened to derail everything. The Japanese team expressed concerns about certain technical specifications that hadn't been properly translated in the original proposal. As tension mounted in the conference room, Brandon Wells seized the opportunity to assert control, speaking over the translators and dismissing the concerns as minor misunderstandings that could be addressed after signing. Elijah, who had been monitoring the discussion carefully, recognized the disaster unfolding. The Takashi executives were using specific language that indicated deep discomfort, not just routine clarification questions. He slipped a note to Harrington, who read it quickly and frowned. "I suggest a short recess," the CEO announced, interrupting Brandon mid-sentence. "Let's take 30 minutes to review the specifications in question." In the private breakout room, Harrington confronted Brandon. "Wells, you're pushing too hard." According to Elijah, their language indicates they're close to walking away, Brandon scoffed. "With all due respect, sir, I've been negotiating international deals since before the kid was born. They're using standard delaying tactics to squeeze last-minute concessions." "That's not what's happening," Elijah interjected, unable to remain silent. "They've discovered a genuine discrepancy in the technical specs that affects safety protocols. Their engineers are concerned, and in Japanese business culture, technical accuracy reflects moral trustworthiness. If we dismiss their concerns, we're effectively telling them we can't be trusted." Brandon's face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. We're taking direction from a teenager now. We're considering informed analysis from a valuable team member," Harrington corrected coldly. "What do you suggest, Elijah?" "We need to acknowledge the discrepancy immediately and present a clear plan to address it," Elijah said. "I've drafted a response that explains the error respectfully and outlines our commitment to resolving it before implementation. It emphasizes our appreciation for their thoroughness and our shared commitment to safety." Harrington reviewed the draft and nodded. "This is good. Brandon, have the technical team verify the discrepancy and prepare detailed corrections." Brandon hesitated, clearly struggling with being sidelined. "Sir, I really don't think—" "That's exactly the problem," Harrington cut him off. "You're not thinking about what matters to our partners. Get the technical team on this now." When the negotiations resumed, Harrington personally addressed the Takashi executives, incorporating Elijah's suggested language and approach. The tension in the virtual room visibly dissipated as the Japanese team recognized that their concerns were being taken seriously. By the end of the day, the revised agreement was signed, securing a partnership worth over $300 million. As the Meridian team celebrated, Harrington made a point of publicly acknowledging Elijah's contribution. "Today's successful outcome is a testament to the importance of true cultural understanding in international business," he announced. Elijah Mason's insights were instrumental in preserving this valuable partnership. "I expect everyone at Meridian to recognize and respect the diverse perspectives that strengthen our company." The message was clear. Elijah and Sophia were no longer outliers to be tolerated. They were valued assets to be integrated into the company's fabric. That evening, as they walked to the subway station together, Sophia squeezed her son's hand. "I never imagined this," she admitted quietly. "When I brought you to that career fair, I just thought you might get inspired for your future. I never expected you to transform our present." Elijah smiled, but his expression remained thoughtful. "It's just the beginning, Mom. We've proven ourselves in a crisis, but that doesn't mean everything changes overnight. Brandon and his allies will regroup. We need to be prepared." Sophia nodded, her expression sobering. "You're right. Success brings its own challenges." She sighed, then squared her shoulders. "But we face them together, as we always have." What neither of them realized was that Brandon Wells had already begun implementing his counterattack, one designed not just to discredit Elijah, but to destroy his newfound credibility entirely. The first signs of trouble appeared 3 weeks after the Takashi success. Elijah arrived at Meridian to find the international division buzzing with tension. Harrington was in emergency meetings all morning, and several executives who had recently become friendly with Elijah now avoided eye contact in the hallways. "Something's wrong," he texted his mother, who was conducting interviews for her expanded facilities team. "Be careful," she responded immediately. "I've heard rumors about an internal investigation." By lunchtime, Elijah discovered the reason for the sudden chill. An anonymous email had circulated among the board members, questioning his language certifications and suggesting that his role in the Takashi negotiations had been greatly exaggerated. More disturbingly, the email implied that his mother's promotion was the result of Harrington's unusual personal interest in the family. The insinuation made Elijah's blood boil, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was exactly the kind of attack he had anticipated from Brandon, aimed not just at his credentials, but at his and his mother's integrity. When Elijah was finally called into Harrington's office that afternoon, he found the CEO looking tired and irritated. Brandon Wells sat in one of the visitor chairs, a thin smile on his face. "There are some concerns about your qualifications that we need to address," Harrington said without preamble. "The board has requested a formal verification of your language certifications and a review of your contributions to recent projects." "I understand," Elijah replied evenly. "I'm happy to provide all necessary documentation." "The thing is," Brandon interjected smoothly, "we've checked with the certification authorities, and they have no record of some of the credentials you claim to have." Elijah frowned. "That's impossible. I have copies of all my certificates. Some are still pending because of my age, but I've passed the preliminary assessments." "Preliminary assessments aren't the same as formal certifications," Brandon pointed out, his voice dripping with false concern. "And there's also the matter of how much access you've had to confidential information without proper vetting." Harrington held up a hand to silence Brandon. "Let's focus on the certification issue first. Elijah, I need you to provide all your documentation by tomorrow morning. The board has called a special meeting to review your position here." As Elijah left the office, he heard Brandon say, "It's unfortunate, but we have to consider the possibility that we've all been taken in by a very elaborate con." That evening, Elijah and Sophia spread his certificates and test results across their kitchen table. Everything was in order, exactly as he had claimed. Dr. Nakamura had even sent a formal letter to Meridian confirming her assessment of his language abilities after their initial meeting. "This doesn't make sense," Sophia said, reviewing the email that had been forwarded to her from HR questioning her qualifications for her new position. "Why would anyone doubt documentation that's so easy to verify?" Elijah stared at the papers thoughtfully. "Because verification takes time, and in that time doubt spreads. People start questioning everything, looking for other explanations." He looked up at his mother. "This isn't about facts. It's about narrative. Brandon is trying to change the story about us." Sophia's expression hardened with determination. "Then we need to control our own narrative." The next morning, they arrived at Meridian early. Sophia headed straight to her department to gather performance data and testimonials from her team. Elijah made his way to the international division, where he had arranged to meet with several translators who had worked with him on various projects. As he waited in the conference room, the door opened to reveal not the translators, but Janet, Harrington's executive assistant. "Mr. Mason," she said formally, "Mr. Harrington would like to see you immediately." Elijah's heart sank, but he followed her without protest. In Harrington's office, he found not only the CEO but also several board members and legal counsel. Brandon sat to one side, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Elijah," Harrington began, his tone grave, "some serious allegations have been raised. In addition to questions about your certifications, there's now evidence suggesting you may have accessed confidential company information beyond the scope of your consultancy agreement." "That's not true," Elijah responded, keeping his voice steady despite the shock. "I've only reviewed documents directly related to my assigned projects." One of the lawyers slid a folder across the table. "These access logs show your credentials being used to view financial data and executive communications unrelated to your work." Elijah opened the folder and scanned the logs, his mind racing. "These aren't my access times. I wasn't even in the building during some of these instances." "Your login credentials were used," the lawyer insisted. "Then someone else used them," Elijah countered. "I've never accessed these files or folders." Brandon cleared his throat. "Perhaps in your enthusiasm to prove yourself valuable, you exceeded the boundaries of your role. It's understandable for someone your age, but still a serious breach of trust." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, and Elijah suddenly saw the full scope of the trap that had been laid. Brandon hadn't just questioned his qualifications, he had manufactured evidence of wrongdoing. "This is a setup," Elijah said quietly, looking directly at Harrington. "And I can prove it. The CEO raised an eyebrow. How? My student schedule is a matter of record. I physically couldn't have been at Meridian during several of these access times. Elijah pulled out his phone. Plus, I've been documenting my work meticulously, including recording all meetings with permission from participants. He pulled up a folder of recordings and set the phone on the table. You'll find that in several of these meetings, Mr. Wells specifically directed me to focus only on translation issues and leave other aspects of the projects to the adults in the room. He's been actively limiting my access while apparently using my credentials to create this false trail. Brandon's face paled slightly. That's absurd. Why would I? Because I threatened your position, Elijah interrupted. Not intentionally, but my success with Takashi made you look bad, especially after you nearly tanked the deal with your approach. He turned back to Harrington and the board members. Check the security camera footage for the times in these logs. You won't see me at those workstations, but you might see someone else using my login. The tension in the room was palpable as Harrington considered this suggestion. After a moment, he nodded to one of the board members, who stepped out to make a call. While we're waiting for that, Elijah continued, I'd like to address the certification issue. He opened his backpack and removed a folder containing all his documentation, including Dr. Nakamura's assessment and emails from various testing authorities confirming his results. You'll notice that some of these are preliminary certifications rather than final ones because of age restrictions, he explained. But they all confirm my proficiency levels as I've stated them. The board members examined the documents with growing interest. One of them, an older woman with sharp eyes, looked up at Brandon. These appear to be in order, Mr. Wells. Can you explain the discrepancy with your report? Brandon shifted uncomfortably. I was given information from our HR department that you requested specifically. Sophia's voice came from the doorway. She stood there with Janet and another woman Elijah recognized. As the head of HR, I've just had a very interesting conversation with Ms. Parker about how you convinced her to run specialized verification checks on only certain aspects of Elijah's qualifications, the ones that would take longest to fully verify. Ms. Parker nodded, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Mr. Wells was very insistent that we treat this as a high-priority, confidential matter. He specifically asked me not to reach out to the testing authorities directly, but to use our standard verification services, which can take weeks for international credentials. Sophia stepped fully into the room, her posture confident despite the intimidating setting. Mr. Harrington, board members, I apologize for the interruption, but it appears my son and I have been targeted in a coordinated effort to discredit us. Janet spoke up next. Sir, security has pulled the footage you requested. Mr. Wells was indeed at the workstation logged as Elijah's during 3 of the questionable access times. All eyes turned to Brandon, whose composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous. The kid is a consultant, not even a real employee. His mother was cleaning toilets 2 months ago. They have no business making decisions that affect this company's future. The naked prejudice in his outburst seemed to shock even him as the words left his mouth. The room fell silent, and Harrington's expression darkened. Mr. Wells, he said coldly, I think you should leave now. We'll discuss your future with the company privately. After Brandon had been escorted out, Harrington turned to Elijah and Sophia. I owe you both an apology. We should have investigated these allegations more thoroughly before calling this meeting. You did what any responsible leadership team would do, Sophia replied diplomatically. But now that the truth is clear, I hope we can focus on moving forward productively. One of the board members, the sharp-eyed woman who had questioned Brandon, leaned forward. I'm curious, Mr. Mason. You must have suspected something like this might happen. Why continue working in such a hostile environment? Elijah considered the question carefully. Because change doesn't happen by avoiding resistance, he finally said. The scholarships that Meridian is establishing will bring more people like me into this company, people with different perspectives and experiences. If I left at the first sign of pushback, what message would that send to them? The woman smiled slightly, nodding with approval. Besides, Elijah continued, this was never just about me having a prestigious job. It was about proving that talent and value can come from unexpected places. that companies like Meridian are stronger when they look beyond traditional credentials and backgrounds. Harrington studied him with new respect. Well said, he turned to the board members. I believe we've addressed the immediate concerns. Unless there are objections, I suggest we proceed with the expanded scholarship program announcement as planned, with Elijah and Sophia as key speakers at the launch event. The meeting concluded with handshakes and apologies. As they left the executive floor, Sophia hugged her son tightly. You handled that beautifully, she whispered. Your father would have been so proud. The mention of his father, who had passed away when Elijah was just 5, brought unexpected tears to his eyes. I wish he could see us now, he murmured. He can, Sophia assured him, wiping away her own tears. In some way, he can. In the months that followed, Meridian Enterprises underwent a transformation. Brandon Wells was quietly dismissed, and the international division was restructured to emphasize cultural competence alongside business expertise. Sophia's facilities management team became a model for operational efficiency and employee satisfaction, with several of her innovations adopted company-wide. The scholarship program launched to national attention, with Elijah's story featured in business publications as an example of untapped potential in overlooked communities. The first class of scholars included students from diverse backgrounds with remarkable linguistic and cultural knowledge, each bringing unique perspectives to Meridian's evolving corporate culture. Elijah continued his dual life as student and consultant, maintaining perfect grades while helping Meridian navigate increasingly complex global partnerships. As his reputation grew, other companies began reaching out with consulting offers, but he remained loyal to the organization that had taken a chance on him, however reluctantly at first. 1 year after their confrontation in the career fair, Elijah found himself once again in Harrington's office. This time, however, he was there by invitation to discuss the expansion of the scholarship program and his own future with the company. Princeton has offered you early admission, Harrington noted, reviewing a letter on his desk. With a full scholarship, impressive. Yes, sir, Elijah confirmed. I'll be majoring in international relations with a focus on business diplomacy. And you'll continue working with us during breaks and summers. If you'll have me, Elijah replied with a smile. I've got some ideas for improving our Asian market approach that I'd like to implement before I leave for college. Harrington leaned back in his chair, regarding Elijah thoughtfully. You know, when you first stood up to me in that exhibition hall, I thought you were either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, possibly both. And now? Elijah asked. Now I think you might be the best investment Meridian has ever made. Harrington gestured toward the window, where the Philadelphia skyline stretched out before them. Not just because of your skills, but because of what you've taught this company about itself, about the talent we were missing by looking in all the same places. He stood and extended his hand. The world of business is changing, Elijah. Companies that adapt to that change will thrive. Those that resist will become obsolete. Thanks to you and your mother, Meridian will be among those that thrive. As they shook hands, Elijah felt the weight of everything that had happened over the past year. The challenges, the victories, the moments of doubt and triumph. He had entered Meridian as an outsider determined to be seen. He was leaving as an architect of its future. Languages connect people across borders, Elijah said, switching effortlessly to Arabic, the language that had started it all. But it's understanding that builds bridges. Harrington smiled, recognizing the phrase from their first encounter. Indeed, and bridges once built can carry us all to places we never imagined possible. That evening, as Elijah helped his mother prepare dinner in their new apartment, a spacious 3-bedroom in a better neighborhood, purchased with Sophia's improved salary, he reflected on the journey they had taken together. Do you ever think about where we'd be if I hadn't gone to that career fair? He asked, chopping vegetables beside her. Sophia considered the question as she stirred the soup. I believe some paths find us even when we try to avoid them. Your gift with languages was always going to open doors. Maybe not those exact doors, but others. But standing up to Harrington like that? That wasn't planned. No, Sophia agreed with a smile. That was pure Elijah, my brave, sometimes too honest son who cannot bear to be underestimated. They worked in comfortable silence for a moment, before Sophia spoke again. The difference you've made isn't just in our lives, you know. I see it every day at Meridian. The new scholars, the changed policies, the conversations that happen now that didn't happen before. You've created ripples that will continue long after you're at Princeton. Elijah felt a swell of emotion at her words. We did it together, Mom, always together. As they sat down to dinner, Elijah's phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from one of the scholarship recipients, a brilliant young woman from Camden who spoke 5 languages and had developed an app for community translation services. She was thanking him for his mentorship and sharing news of her early acceptance to MIT. Another life changed, Sophia said, reading the message over his shoulder. Another bridge built, Elijah corrected with a smile. Outside their window, the city lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk, each one a reminder of the countless stories unfolding across Philadelphia. Stories of struggle and triumph, of barriers broken and new paths forged. Somewhere out there, another child of a cleaner or a janitor or a dishwasher was discovering their own unique gift, their own voice waiting to be heard. And when that voice spoke up, thanks to Elijah and Sophia Mason, there would be more people ready to listen. Dear listeners, we hope Elijah and Sophia's journey has touched your hearts and reminded you of the power of perseverance and speaking your truth. The ability to communicate across languages and cultures isn't just a skill. It's a bridge to understanding and transformation. For more inspiring stories like this one, we've created a special playlist featuring characters who overcome seemingly impossible odds with dignity and determination. Find it by clicking to the left. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and like this video to help us continue sharing these powerful narratives. Every day we bring you stories that celebrate the complexity and beauty of the human experience. What was your favorite moment from Elijah's journey? Did Sophia's quiet strength remind you of someone in your own life? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until our next story, remember that your voice, like Elijah's, has the power to change worlds.